Hello, lovely souls. Welcome to the Awakening to Your Soul Self podcast. I'm Christina Larero, a certified angel messenger and angel Reiki master teacher. My spiritual journey began in the spring of 2022 when my spirit team nudged me to listen to the amazing Angels and Awakening podcast by Julie Jancis. Since then, I've been learning to use my spiritual gifts and growing increasingly curious about spirituality and the various healing modalities. I'm so excited for you to join me on this special journey as we dive into spirituality and healing while exchanging our wisdom and profound insights with other remarkable healers. So grab a cup of coffee or tea, get cozy, and let's embark on the spiritual journey together. Hey there, it's Christina the Angel Messenger here. I just wanted to remind you to stay connected with me for all the latest updates and angel messages. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Christina Angel Messenger. Remember, that's Christina. If you're interested in an angel Reiki session, you can book one virtually or in person through my website at www.christinaangelmessenger.com. Remember, that's Christina angelmessenger.com. Stay tuned for more uplifting, insightful content on this podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to Awakening to Your Soul Self podcast. I'm Christina, your host, and I have Jen here. She wrote Uprising, Surviving and Thriving in a World That is Waking Up. She's here to talk about spiritual awakening, personal awakening, and even global awakening. Welcome, Jen.
Hi, Christina. Thank you so much for having me today. It's an honor to be here.
Perfect. So I always like to start off with the guest introducing themselves by who are you and what do you do?
All right. So I'm Jen Madrone, and I live in Northern California. And I've been in the field of uh, healing, alternative healing, for about 20 years. So I'm a massage therapist. I'm a sound healer using tuning forks, planetary frequencies, gongs, singing bowls, the whole thing. I'm also a Reiki master, and there's some other forms of energy work that I do in there. And I also teach healing arts here locally. So I that's that was kind of the beginning, and then
Mm.
in the past like 10 years, it's morphed into also what I call like spiritual wellness coaching. And
Mm.
so that's something that I'm able to do beyond just my community. And I know we'll get more into that story as we talk about my book and the other topics. But so that leads me to my most recent incarnation in my work is as an author. So just publishing a book about 5 months ago now, I think.
That's amazing. I always like to ask the guest as well if you can give a short story of your spiritual awakening.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. It's always hard to know exactly where the awakening starts. For
Yeah.
some people it's very clear, because they have a huge explosion that
Yeah.
begins it. And then for many of us, it kind of creeps up on you. And so
Hmm.
mine definitely crept up on me a bit. And because I was studying alternative healing, spirituality,
Mm.
very interested in all of these topics, and just really loved everything esoteric and mystical. It and then began doing some meditation practices and other
Mm.
practices that just opened me up, opened me up, opened me up, and then all of the sudden I found myself um, just experiencing a different version of the world, a different version of me. And so that changed everything in my life. And it affected my relationships and my marriage. And so I went through a divorce, which was very
Mm.
painful, and other big personal shifts. During that time, mixed in with many different awakening experiences, what I call ego death experiences, working with plant medicines, all of these things just created the perfect storm
Yeah.
for that transformation to happen. And of course it's ongoing, but that was the bulk of it.
Perfect. So in your book, if anybody wants to buy it, it's really good. I read it. Uprising. Can you talk about personal awakening? So, what is it? And you're talking about your book, certain steps and some signs.
Yeah, absolutely. So spiritual awakening is definitely a term that has gotten more popular and is overused sometimes. There's so
Mm-hmm.
many different definitions for it. So I'm just going to speak from my perspective
Yep.
and how I view it. And so I see spiritual awakening as a huge, and when we're talking about personal shift, this is just a very intimate personal experience where there's a huge shift in consciousness, a huge shift in perspective, and a huge vibrational shift that is completely physical as well as emotional, energetic, and spiritual. So it's on every single level. And because it's a vibrational shift and an energetic shift, it turns everything upside down in our life.
Yep.
And this shift, what it shows us and why it makes us question everything, is because it uncovers the fact that we are not separate from spirit. And it often shows us the fact that we've created this small, separate self. And in so doing, because of experiences in our life, trauma when we were young,
Yep.
and even just if there wasn't much trauma, even just the way that we are socialized and the programs that we are exposed to as we grow, causes us to separate from our true self, from our higher
Mm-hmm.
self, from spirit. And and then there comes a time in life where our soul is like, this is unacceptable, I'm
Mm-hmm.
starting to remember who I really am. And that is usually when things just turn upside down and get kind of crazy or very
Yeah.
crazy, depending.
Depending where you are and
Yeah,
how.
yeah, exactly. And depending on what has led you to this point and what it is that you came here to the planet to heal and all of these things. Um, so when we begin to awaken, there's often catalysts that spark the awakening or really just make it skyrocket, um, like divorce. So in my case, like it
Mm-hmm.
was already starting, but the divorce was one of the things that just really propelled it to the next level. Um, and it can be so many different things. The most common ones are often divorce, loss of a loved one, um,
Mm-hmm.
illnesses and sicknesses and near-death experiences, plant medicine experiences. There's so many different things. I had someone in my Facebook group say that um, listening to a Tom Petty song was her sparked her spiritual awakening. But it can also, many people have reported listening to Eckhart Tolle or Alan Watts, or
Yep.
just the exact right moment where this higher vibrational energy came in and they were open and ready for it.
Yeah.
And that's what created that vibrational shift for them. And so it really can be anything, but those are some of the more common ones. Um, and then, do you want me to go into the stages,
Yes,
the
please.
awakening process? So it took me a little while to come up with the stages. I've been doing this work really intensely with people going through the really messy part of the awakening process for a
Yeah.
while. And and finally I was like, okay, I really think I need to kind of quantify this and put it in stages. But the reason I was reluctant is because it's not a linear process. It's never the same for everybody. And so
No.
I didn't want people to think that, if it didn't follow X, Y, and Z for them, then they're doing it wrong, or that's not
Yeah.
actually an awakening, or, all of these things. And so, I always kind of preface the stages with, this is what I've found to be the most common for people
Okay.
and how I chose to quantify it, but it can it can go in a different order. You can go back and repeat steps.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes steps are you do a stage a couple of times. But once I did finally put this in words and put it out there, I found that people were very, very receptive to it. And it was really helpful in helping people see, like, oh, okay, that's where I'm at. That's where I'm going. I'm not losing my mind. This
Yeah.
is for a reason and it's a progression. I'm not going to be stuck here forever.
Hmm.
So that's why I chose to really put it out there. And so I'll just run through them real quick. It could be a whole, we could have a couple-hour discussion just
Yeah,
on.
absolutely.
So I'll do it briefly, and then if people are interested, they can grab the book and
Yeah.
read more about it. So the first stage that we talked about a little bit was the wake up call, and that's the catalyst
Yeah.
that sparks the awakening. And so we talked about that. Like I said, that can be anything, and there can also be a couple different wake up calls where they
Hmm.
build on each other because we're really stubborn sometimes, and so we need that, kind of kick in the ass a few times. Um, and then after that wake up call, once we've had that experience or we've had that initial shift in vibration, um, then stage two is the rabbit hole. And that's
Yes.
generally when we begin to question everything in our life. We've
Yes.
seen a different perspective, we feel differently. And so we begin to question every single thing in our life, who we are, why we're here, what this life is.
Hmm.
And I call it the rabbit hole because it really, the purpose is to take us down into ourselves, um,
Yeah.
deeper in to look for the answer to these questions. And oftentimes that means we get so excited about this new possibility that we do go down other rabbit holes of, like, you know uh, different spiritual topics, or
Yep.
so many different things. But ultimately the purpose is to bring us deeper down into ourselves to find those questions,
Yeah.
or answers to those questions. um, and then after that, or sometimes intermixed with that,
Hmm.
the next stage three is the stage of isolation and separation.
Hmm.
So often, what happens when we have begun this process and started to see things differently and started to take a different perspective and question everything, we find that we need to separate a bit from life, from the world, from our friends and family often, so that we can really see what's true for us and
Hmm.
no longer source the answers to these questions from the world around us. And so that separation and isolation is sometimes a choice. Sometimes it's forced on us through a series of events because it's necessary for our growth and our
Right.
healing. And so this one's often when people will reach out because it becomes really challenging. The excitement kind of starts to wear off a little bit, and you're like, okay, what's going on.
Yeah.
Um, and and so loneliness can really set in, because for the first time people are like, wow, I really don't know who I am. And I thought I knew like what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to do this. I
Exactly.
wanted to do that. And now that's changing too.
Yeah.
And and so it's really a very purposeful part and necessary part of the process to separate ourselves from everything we knew so that we can see what's true for us. And so, because of these steps and that separation and the vibrational shift that brings everything up to the surface, we then often move into the dark night of the soul,
Hmm.
where we begin to process the things that we have been avoiding most of our lives. So, we're processing the old traumas, old beliefs, old programmings, all of the things that we thought we could avoid
Yeah.
by being busy or whatever it is we're doing, they now come to the surface because these are the heavy energies. These are the lower vibrational energies. And when we have that energetic shift, anything that's not a match for this new energy is now coming to the surface that can't exist in the same place.
Yeah.
And, and so this dark night of the soul is always extremely challenging, um, and difficult. And it can be sparked by something in our life, something that happens that triggers, um, all of all of our stuff to come. And it can also just be a part of the process of the vibrational shift. So it looks very different for everybody, um, and it can last, a couple of months. Usually it's way more than a one night.
Yeah. For sure.
And it can even last a couple years, and
Yeah.
there can be several dark nights of the soul throughout the process. But this is really a big part of the cleansing and detox process that happens during awakening. We have to give ourselves a space to heal,
Yeah.
to move all of this trauma and old baggage and things that keep us separated from ourselves out of the body. And that takes time.
Yeah. And you find out things that you never really thought about.
Right.
Things come up
Absolutely.
that from like childhood, and you're like, oh, I never thought about that. But now that I'm healing, that comes up.
Exactly. Yeah, because we're masters of pushing it down and telling ourselves like that's not a big deal,
Yeah.
because it's really a survival mechanism that's necessary at that point. And then as we get older, we realize that it's no longer helping us. So it comes
Yeah.
to the surface, and it's a really intelligent. We have such an intelligent soul. It knows how to heal. And so it is really beautiful to watch those things that we weren't
Yeah.
really aware of come up. And it's like, wow, okay, I never would have thought of this, but I'm so grateful that I get to move this
Mhm.
out.
And it's kind of like this. Well, while you were talking about the stages, Spirit brought through. Basically, it's like a roller coaster. So you start off, you get the catapult,
Uh
and
huh.
then you're climbing up the roller coaster, doing the rabbit hole because you're so excited, and then you kind of stall at the top, and then you do the work to do the dark night of the soul, and then you come back up.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. I could feel that moment where you stall at the top of the roller coaster, like, oh shit, and then
Yeah,
and then the ride just keeps going. Oh, that's a great analogy.
it just
Yeah,
takes time. I think it's in our society, we just want everything right now. We want
right.
the guidebook, and then if we don't follow the guide, it's kind of like when you're trying to lose weight or you're trying to do this workout or thing and you don't do it the first time correctly, then you're like, well, I can't do that. Or why
Right.
isn't this working for me?
Right. Yeah.
And
And
that's just not the way it works.
exactly. And that's our ego speaking, and so when we try to put the spiritual process into the ego perspective, it just doesn't work.
Nope.
It's the opposite of what we're doing here, and so we're moving from that ego-centered, mind-driven living to that heart-centered,
Yeah.
intuition-driven, love-driven living. And so the dark night of the soul really does that purification so that we can hear what our heart is saying, so that we can hear what our intuition is saying. And
Yeah.
then when we have moved through a lot of that, we often begin to move into stage 5, which is the void, spiritual limbo. And it's funny, after the dark night of the soul, we often expect, like, that was really hard. I'm so
Hmm.
ready. I'm so ready to things shift and get lighter and easier. And usually that's not what happens. Usually what happens is we have to go into this space of what I call the void or spiritual limbo, so that we can now process all of these things that have been moving through us, all of these realizations that we've been having, all this healing that we've been doing. And at this point, it often seems like we've stopped or stalled in the process. And some people really reach out to me and be like, I don't know what's happening. I've
Yeah.
just gone through all this healing, and now it feels like nothing's happening. And I'm questioning whether any of it was real or not. And it is an essential part of the process, because we have to give ourselves time to really sink in and shift at the cellular level, to shift at every point in our being. Because if we just jump out and go like, okay, I'm healed, and we
Yeah.
go back to our regular lives, we're going to go back to the same patterns. We're going to go back to
Exactly.
the same way of living. And
Yeah.
so this time of the void, um, can be, it can feel frustrating, um, but it is really essential to the process. And knowing that it doesn't last forever, and that we need to take this time to rest, to integrate, to just be with ourselves, and know that when it is time, we will know. And sometimes people do get stuck in the void, often because their mind is making up a story of what it is, and they'll get stuck
Hmm.
in this void. And it is helpful to have help to move out of it, to see the next step, to kind of have someone just give you a gentle nudge, to the next level, which then is what I call the rebirth stage. And
Mm.
so that's when we begin to really embody our true self, and our the highest self, what I would call the big self, where we had the small self, the ego-centered self. Now we are moving and embodying and living through the heart-centered self.
Right.
And so this rebirth comes from a whole different place. We begin to really see for the first time what it is that our soul is here to share and do and be and create. And it feels really good once we get to this point. We're
Yes, it
like,
does.
okay, I'm so grateful I stuck with it, and I'm so excited. And it can also come with a little bit of like trepidation, like, okay, I'm not really sure how this is going to be, because I'm ready to share these new gifts. I'm ready to go back into the world,
Yeah.
um, as this truest version of myself. But there can often be some fear involved in that, because it's so new. It's a new
Yeah.
experience, and so being gentle with ourselves, as we move into that last stage of reentry is really critical. And so reentry is when we make those bold moves,
Hmm.
when when we step back into our lives, into the world in a new and different way. And we we see
Yeah.
how it's all going to unfold.
Yeah. After the rebirth, you just see everything differently, and you gotta be patient with yourself because all that healing that you're doing does take some energy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It can be so exhausting.
And then sometimes you find, I don't know if you've had this with clients, but I feel like even after the dark night of the soul and after the void, you still might have to come back because you might have not healed everything, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And really, you continue to heal your whole life.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
it's never over. And then um, we can have secondary awakenings, and that's what I'm noticing now. Is that a lot of people are starting to now have these secondary awakenings. It's been maybe years, maybe
Mm,
decades since their initial one, and I feel like I'm even experiencing this to a certain level of like, wow, what are these symptoms? Oh, I know these symptoms. It looks
yeah.
different than it did last time, but it's time for another um, up level or uprising,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it. So that's
Ooh, that's
exciting.
yeah. And in this life, we're just learning and we're growing. So to go through another spiritual awakening, I think only makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because everything is shifting, and that so we can kind of segue into the planetary awakening.
Yes.
It's a perfect transition because everything is shifting so quickly on our planet, and in so many ways. And so, of course, it's going to have an effect on each one of us because we know that we are all connected, and not just as a spiritual concept, but also as a quantum physics concept. We are energy, and all energy is connected. And
Yes.
I love the phrase, we are a microcosm of the macrocosm. So whatever is
Mm,
happening in the bigger picture is happening internally, and vice versa.
yeah.
Whatever happens internally affects the world around us. And so what I feel like is happening on this planet is that there's a huge influx of higher vibrational energy being poured onto the planet at
Hmm.
this point in time. And it can come in the form of solar flares, it can come in the form of geomagnetic storms, and it definitely comes in forms that we can't see or quantify,
Yeah.
and it's creating a huge shift right now on the planet, and it's disrupting everything, and it's affecting everybody, and it's exactly what is needed at this point in time. And I think um, that is why we see so many people going through the awakening process right now,
Yeah.
and also why many of us are starting to experience, another level of awakening, because here we are at another vibrational shift. Here we are at that next level, and it's sometimes people will say, well, it sure doesn't look like we are waking
Hmm.
up. It sure
Yeah.
doesn't look like we're going through a planetary awakening right now, because everything is just a big shit show. It's a mess,
Yeah.
and it is. I agree. Um, but that is all of the lower vibrational energy coming to the surface to be healed and cleared. It was under the surface for
Mm,
so long, and now it has to be and is being pushed to the surface so it can be seen. No longer is allowed to hide in the
yeah.
shadows. So this really is a dark night of the soul process that we're in collectively. And we
Yeah.
may be here for a while because there's so much to clear and see
Yeah.
and feel collectively.
I never
And
thought of it that way as it being below the surface and now it's rising. But I also feel like spirituality is more talked about. There's more healers. There's all different types of healers. And I think that's because of this global awakening that's happening.
exactly, I believe that too. And really, in direct proportion to that higher vibrational energy that's being poured on the planet, then people respond to it by saying, wow, suddenly I'm like more interested in meditation. I'm more
Hmm.
interested in, going to a psychic or learning breath work. And there's so many reasons for this. We could talk about astrology, and
Yep.
we could, also talk about ancient prophecies that predicted this time. But the reality is that even with all of the the darkness and all of the heaviness that we see around us, it's in equal proportions to the amount of light that's coming in,
Mhm.
in the forms of people starting to do the healing work. It's no longer taboo to talk about
Right.
your sexual abuse, and things that happened in your childhood. It's amazing how quickly that has shifted and changed, and now it's become acceptable and almost required to meditate. It's really fascinating how quickly that has changed, and things like plant medicine are not only more sought after but now being accepted into the world of therapy and the more
Yeah.
traditional modalities of healing are now accepting that these are viable resources and viable ways of healing. And so these are the things that give me hope,
Yeah.
that help me see that, yes, this is a very purposeful process that we're going through collectively, just like when we go through this personally and we have to go through the detox and we have
Yep.
symptoms. We didn't even talk about the symptoms, but we have
Hmm.
all of these symptoms that are detox symptoms, that are symptoms of the vibrational shift. And these same sort of symptoms show up collectively. And so, what I've been seeing symptom wise um, collectively is a lot of brain fog, a lot of exhaustion, a lot of feeling a little more separated from ourselves or spirit,
Hmm.
a little more challenging to reconnect with that. It's taking a little more work. And I really feel like it's because of the purging process that's happening. Because when we do a personal detox, if you've done a personal detox before, you know that there's a time where you just feel crappy.
Yep.
You're brain foggy, you're tired, you just don't feel like and then as that moves out of your body, then you feel amazing once you've got through the other side. And
Yeah.
so I very much feel like we're going through a collective purge right now. And those of us who are more sensitive may be feeling it even more, be feeling even more of that. Um, and also at the same time, there's really interesting energetic symptoms that a lot of people have been experiencing and that are definitely a part of personal awakening processes sometimes, not for everybody.
Hmm.
um, and that is just having weird energetic sensations, little pulses,
Yeah.
maybe feeling wired but tired, um, and feeling kind of altered in an altered state of consciousness. All of these are very, very normal
Yeah.
symptoms.
A big one is exhaustion. Like, I feel like everyone I've been talking to lately,
Mm-hmm.
healer or not a healer, is exhausted.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes, I mean, even myself, I will sleep a full night and I'll wake up and I'll be like, why am I so tired? And
Mm-hmm.
Spirit's like, it's because you're feeling all the energy. It's happening around.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I feel like that for many of us, it's part of our purpose. And if we've already done a certain amount of healing, we are helping to do the detoxing for the planet. And
Yeah,
that's absolutely why we are more exhausted, because as we are vibrating at a different level, I don't want to put this into the context of better or worse.
right.
I putting it into the lens of like, okay, some of us are able to process more of
Mm-hmm.
this heavy energy that's coming through, and we've kind of signed up for that. And
Yeah,
so, that's what we're doing right now, and it's exhausting, and it's a lot of work, and everybody's feeling it, no matter where they are in this process, whether they're able to see it or not, it's affecting us all.
yeah. And I definitely feel like as a global awakening, there's going to be another another purge happening
Mm-hmm.
of healers, of more awakenings happening. I even Spirit trying to show me like even different healing modalities. I mean, people are, creating their own healing modalities that work, and it's not so like woo-woo talk like
Mm-hmm.
it was 10
Mm-hmm.
years ago, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, it's exciting. It's being accepted because so many of us are going through that transition where we're seeing that there's so many more possibilities,
Yeah.
you know. And but I think you're absolutely right. There is going to be much more purging. There currently is so much that still needs to be healed and cleared and moved out of the way so that we can all experience our own personal light and the collective light. And we get glimpses of that, and people are craving that
Yeah.
so much. And so it's absolutely happening, and it's really exciting and sometimes scary because we don't
Mhm.
know how it's all going to unfold, and what
Yeah.
level of purging and destruction is necessary. We just don't know, and so we have to do our best to really just anchor that light that we have and know that our own personal work of healing, and our ability to share our light and our gifts is what changes the planet. It is what creates the shift. And so, even if we feel like I need to be doing more and more and more, it's like, well, start with yourself. Keep doing the work because you have no idea how influential it really is, to in the creation of that vibrational shift. As each one of us does it, we are changing the energy of the planet.
We are. And, as a collective, we just are more accepting of what is happening in the world. Not everything, of course. But a part of me is like almost wondering with these heat waves and these floodings, if that's part of this purging that is happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
believe so. I believe so. It's these things happen all of the time, but they're definitely been happening a lot more. And I really believe that the um, the true nature of life of our planet is balance. And when things get out of balance, they have to come back into balance. And so this could be our earth coming back into balance.
Hmm.
Just like it, and it's great how, the reflection is always there. Just like when we become out of balance by separating from ourselves, then our soul comes back around and says, nope, it's time to correct that balance. It's time to come back
Yeah.
into balance with who we are. And so it shows up in everything. It shows up in nature. It shows up in our politics. It shows up, in social media, even though in all of these areas it can look a little distorted.
Yeah.
you know. So
Yeah.
it's pretty amazing if we do a perspective shift. Um, and we're really careful with moving out of fear and into that bigger perspective. Like we can begin to see all of these things happening around us. It's just really difficult when so many people are in a fear state, you
Yeah.
know, to remind ourselves that, like, no, that's functioning from the ego. That's functioning from the small self. And it's not truth. That's the illusion. And so if we can just take the bigger perspective, it's not about turning a blind eye to what's happening. It's just about taking a bigger perspective so that we can see more of what is actually happening instead of getting caught in that fear.
Yeah. And the fear is definitely, ego. And that's, like you said, that's one of the first things you try to work with is hiding that ego down and being like, no, that's not what's actually happening.
Right, exactly. Is the ego is so used to being in charge.
Yeah.
It's so used to running the show because that's what happened when we separated from ourselves at a young age. We moved from, the heart centered beingness and handed the keys of the kingdom over to the ego and the mind because the mind said, I will keep you safe.
Yeah.
I will keep you safe. I'll protect you. And then it's just started moving really quickly. When we're young, when we're kids, we're just present. The
Yeah.
mind is only there to tell us we're hungry, or
Mm-hmm.
we're tired, or whatever it is. And then as we grew, it took over, and it got so loud that we could no longer hear what our heart was saying to us.
Right.
you know and
Yeah. And I think, you know, just talking about children, that age where we don't have the egoic mind in our way.
right.
We're still so close to the other side, to heaven, universe, however you want to call it, that we hit a certain age and that's when the ego kicks in. It's like, I need to protect you. I'm gonna tell you all these things, and then you grow up and you're like, wait a second.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And in the book, I talk about it as the original heartbreak, which
Mm-hmm.
is a phrase that I love, and it's a phrase that was given to me by one of my teachers, who talked about the moment or time period when we're very little. It happens at a very young age when we begin to believe the collective programming that we are not enough, and that
Yeah.
we are just human, and that we are separate from spirit, and that what we call the original heartbreak can be a specific moment in time of trauma in our childhood, or a phrase that was said by a parent, or a loved one, or it can be a series of events. It can be just the fact that we've been barraged by these ideas and these misguided beliefs, and then they sink in and we start to believe them. And really it's just a way of protecting our our really sweet vulnerable self,
Yeah.
you know. And it's often necessary because of the amount of trauma um, that we have experienced, and it's necessary because we don't have the tools at that time.
Right.
But as we grow, we start to collect those tools, and we start to,
Yeah.
and we're no longer dependent on the adults in our life for
Yes.
our safety and protection. So there's some very real things here, that are happening. And I also believe this process is also why we came to the planet. We
Yeah.
have to separate from ourselves in order to truly reconnect and know who we are at the deepest level. If that separation didn't occur, then we would be really beautiful humans, but we wouldn't fully understand the human experience.
Absolutely. So I'd love to wrap up this conversation with you just talking a little bit about your book. It's called Uprising. We talked a little bit about a general synopsis of the book through our conversation. Is there anything specific that you want to point out to people?
Um, Good question. We did cover a lot of it. It's definitely a book for anyone who has gone through this process, or finds himself in this process, or is just curious about the process of spiritual awakening in general. Um, and also part of my intention in writing it, one was to help support people through the process, obviously, and show them that they're not alone in this, that this is something that is, like we talked about, is happening faster and faster. But also, my intention is there to be, spark that little spark of awakening in people who are ready and open for
Yeah.
it, and so I never thought that I would write a book. And and I was teaching this work for many years, and really the first year, um, one of my students was like, "You should put this in a book." And
Hmm.
I just kind of laughed at him. I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." And he kept teasing me about it and bringing it up. And finally, a couple of years later, I was like, "Hey, it's time." And spirit just kind of pushed me
Mm,
to do it. And so, really, I think of it more as a guidebook or survival guide than, a piece of fine literary art.
yeah,
you know.
agreed. Yeah. It's definitely a guidebook or a survival guide, as you said. And I had so many, I mean, so many aha moments looking back. I'm like, that's why I felt that way. Or that makes sense. And I really hope that this book reaches many people because I feel like your intention is pure and there's just a lot of information in there that is going to be helpful for people, whether they've done their spiritual awakening or want to look back at their spirit. That's really what I did for is to look back at my spiritual awakening and be like, all right, at that point, I was in the void. At that point, I was, in the rebirth process. And as we talked about, it's going to be a second or third spiritual awakening that you're going to experience in your lifetime. And now that you read the book, then you can be like, okay, I know where I am. It's going to pass.
Mm-hmm.
Or read it as you're going through it. I think that's going to be really cool to do as well. I wish I had that book a couple
Yeah.
years ago.
I've read it so many times now, and it's so funny. I thought that I was writing it for, partially for my younger self for when she was going through it, because same thing, I wish I had a book like this. And now as I read it, I'm like, oh, I even wrote this for my future self, because
Yeah.
this is still, it's still so helpful and necessary. And it was funny to have that. It was kind of humbling to have that that recognition of, yeah, you know, I wrote that for all of us, and even for myself in this present moment and in the future. And there's so many stories in there that I've shared,
Yeah.
from some of my students and clients and from myself, and those were really fun to put down on paper. There's so many amazing stories,
Right.
and really my hope is that people can see themselves in these stories, and again know that they're not alone.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
doing
This will
this
definitely
together.
be a book that I picked up a few
Mhm.
times.
Yeah,
So,
awesome.
Jen, with wrapping up, where can people find you? Social media, website, and if you have any paid or free offerings.
Yeah, so my website is jenmadrone.com, and on there's stuff about my sound healing, there's stuff about the book, there is a free offering that's actually called Survival Guide for the Awakening Soul, and
Mm,
that's just a small little
snippet.
PDF, a little snippet, just to kind of give you an introduction to it. And then there's also on my website, there's some descriptions of working with me one-on-one, doing private sessions to go deeper into more specific issues. And then I also have a spiritual mentorship program that's an 8-week program that really dives into um, this whole process of awakening and peeling back the layers of the ego and the layers of illusion one by one. And that's a really fun program that I love doing with people. I also have a YouTube channel that has hundreds of videos on it, all about different topics of spiritual awakening.
Mm.
And so that's a great resource. And then my book is on Kindle, it's paperback, and it's also an audiobook form. So people who would rather listen to
Yeah.
it can listen to it in that form. And then I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, Jen Madrone. You should be able to find me with my name on both of those platforms.
That's awesome, Jen. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been really fun to connect with you, and thank you for the work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you so much. All right, friends, we'll see you next Monday.